Tab Media's special report on resolutions through the Southern Baptist Convention anyway. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash, and joining me to talk about the pros and cons of resolutions will be Baptist historian and professor Dr. Nathan Finn and veteran Southern Baptist pastor Dr. Ted Traylor. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for the invitation.
All right, so it doesn't sound like necessarily a very exciting topic, resolutions, right? Whereas, therefore, be it resolved, all that kind of fun stuff. But resolutions are so much a part of our life in Southern Baptist world, and they, I guess, for lack of better words here, they always create some interest and discussion, and sometimes some controversy each year when we come out of the annual meeting with whatever resolutions were passed by those messengers. So I thought it'd be fun to just talk about what are resolutions, what's their purpose, from the historian, what's the history, and then maybe some back and forth about why should we keep them, why should we not keep them, and if we were to go forward with them, how should we think about that in this culture that we're in right now? So that's a lot of questions, but let's just dive in and maybe start. Dr. Finn, would you start us off with just a little basic understanding context of resolutions?
Sure, thank you. So the idea behind a resolution is it's sort of a statement of position that represents the Baptists who are messengers to a particular convention meeting, whether that's the Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting or whether that's a state convention annual meeting. Many state conventions have resolutions and resolutions committees as well. But the idea is the messengers come together and they say, here's this topic. It might be something very, very mundane, or it might be something really controversial or something in between. But they say, this is kind of the will of the messengers who are gathered here together. So the difference between a resolution and a motion is actually something that's binding on the convention. It affects convention policy. It affects the decisions that paid employees of the convention and other denominational servants make. A resolution officially doesn't affect anyone. It has influence, but it doesn't have authority. And so they are intended to serve sort of different complementary purposes, and whether they do or not, and whether it's helpful or not, is the reason we're having the discussion today.
Well, and your point about the fact that they really don't have authority, resolutions, I think jumps to Dr. Traylor's motion from this past annual meeting, maybe one of the reasons why you made the motion to look at potentially removing a resolutions committee and thus resolutions. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Dr. Traylor?
Certainly. I've been attending Southern Baptist Convention since 1972 and been resolving every year that I've been there, and, raising my ballot. And, most of the time those things are great. My wife served on the resolutions committee when we dealt with Disney several years ago. She was on that resolutions committee, and I've served doing that. And so I've found, our resolve to be helpful in a lot of ways. Here was my reason for going to the microphone, making the motion that the executive committee consider removing our resolutions process. I think that the spirit and tenor of our convention has become so divisive that these issues are simply become wedges that drive us apart and get us off of the main thing that God's called us to be. And the reason that the SBC exists, of course, is for missions. It's why we're here. And I think of late, especially the last 24 months, we have had our eyes taken not just off the ball. I think we're off the lines, off the field, we've got to get back to the message at hand. And if we can resolve to do missions and evangelism and make disciples, count me in. But I just think these items have got us arguing about things that I just see absolutely no good coming out of that. Do we need places we can make statements? Sure we do. But I'll tell you where the statements are made in the Southern Baptist Convention is in the local pulpit across our area. That's the spokesman. As Dr. Finn has so eloquently said, these are non-binding issues. It's just the statement of the people met together. Not a bad thing at all. But I think it's taken our eye off the ball of late. And I don't think it serves us well in the climate in which we're in. Thus, I made the motion for the EC to take a look at it and let them come together here in a few weeks in September, like they've not got anything else to talk about, that they can talk about resolutions when they come together, if they so desire, to take it up and look at it.
They may be thanking you a lot for that, Dr. Traylor. And I did like how you got resolve in there in your answer. That was really good. Well, Dr. Finn, you served on the most recent resolutions committee, vice chairman, I believe, and you have written pretty extensively about why you think that there's still a good purpose and a good point for them. Can you share a little bit about that and why your recent experience, but then also how you see that could still be useful?
Well, my recent experience was it was an honor to serve Southern Baptists, and it was very frustrating to be on the resolution committee. So,
Dr. Finn, if I could say, I told James Merritt he had lost his mind for doing it. I said, I called him. I said, your brain has exited your head if you think you're going to be able to bring us together with the rest. And I could, but I prayed a lot for you guys. I really did, because that was a tough spot for you, James, to be in and to lead that group. Sorry for jumping in, but and thank you for serving, because it was just, man, it was hot in the kitchen. It is tough to get, as James said to me, trying to thread the needle, as was his word, with that resolution. And it was very, very difficult. Well, thank you for serving and doing. I'm sorry. Go ahead and take us there, and I'll be quiet.
No, I appreciate that and appreciate the prayers. And we talked about threading the needle a lot whenever we were together in meeting. So if I can step back just a little bit further, I think one of the realities of resolutions is that at times when Southern Baptists have been very united, resolutions have been non-controversial. And at times when Southern Baptists have been divided by different family discussions, they've become more controversial. And I think that that's almost baked in. That's a feature, not a bug. Resolutions are strong whenever Southern Baptists are united, and resolutions are controversial whenever we're not. And I think you can look back across history and you can see that that's the case. So I would agree with Dr. Traylor that Southern Baptists are very divided. And I think it's one of the reasons why having resolutions right now can be tricky. What I would say is I still think there is a place for Southern Baptists as Southern Baptists. Local church is the headquarters of the Southern Baptist Convention. The SBC could disappear tomorrow. The church marches on. God's purposes march on. But for such a time as this, we do have a Southern Baptist Convention. And I think that there's a place for us as Southern Baptists to go on the record with particular issues that a consensus of active Southern Baptists at the convention feel like is an important issue. Now, whether resolutions are the best way to do that, I think that's debatable. I'm not married to the idea that we have to have resolutions and we have to have a resolution committee, so much as I want us to have a place where Southern Baptists can come together and say, for example, the sanctity of human life really matters. And here's 10,000 Southern Baptists who say that. Or biblical views of what it means to be male and female and what it means to be married. That matters. And here's 10,000 Southern Baptists who say that. And I recognize I just named two things we all agree about, but that's the point I'm making. I want us to have a place to do that. But maybe the resolutions aren't the best way to do that. But whatever the case may be, I do still think, as the largest Protestant denomination, I know we're not really a denomination, but denomination-like group in North America, I still think there's a place for us to say, this is what Southern Baptists and a lot of other like-minded conservative evangelicals believe about these issues. And we want the culture to hear that. We want to speak prophetically, if you will, to the culture about those things. But we certainly need to be wise and strategic about what issues we choose to speak to and what issues we don't. We need as much as possible to speak out of our consensus rather than fostering division. We're never going to do that perfectly, but I think we certainly want to aim for unity and consensus building and Great Commission advance being implicit in all of those resolutions, rather than having resolutions that do distract us from the cause. And it's unfortunate every time that happens. And so I would agree with Dr. Traylor about that.
And Dr. Taylor, you mentioned how the local pulpit is a place for making statements. Do the resolutions or something like that, or something that could be created like that, are those, do they help? Would they be a resource to speak into what the pastor might articulate, how he would might share?
I would say they have helped me in the past, but in the last 2 years, they
Mhm.
have created more angst for me than they've given me
Yeah.
any help whatsoever. The hallway talk, the letters I get, the texts that come, what in the world are we saying and doing? And so those things have been a distraction in my place where I am, and I hear that from a lot of people. And I do believe, Nathan, that we need an opportunity to make some statements. There's no doubt about it. But things that mean that are really heart deep to us. And I know we can't put them all there, but we've changed the Baptist faith and message a few times to bring some of those real, watershed issues, and we bring them into our confession. And if it's that important, then maybe that's the way to go. We need a place to thank the city of Nashville for hosting us. But I still, and I talked with people before bringing my motion. I said, there's got to be a way for us to kindly say things that we all agree on. And, I think there's ways with consensus to do that. But when we get to these mostly cultural and theological issues that we debate, I just don't see them being helpful to us in our mission going forward. The press picks them up. We hand them a stick and they beat us to death with it. And so we walk forward. It's not to say we should, shy away from tough issues. The pulpit can't do that. You have to walk forward on those things. And there has to be a way for us to say some things as a convention. And of course, our greatest strength is our weakness, and weakness strength. And that, we can have 20,000 messengers and vote 20,000 to nothing. And once you walk out the door, it doesn't mean a thing. I mean, it doesn't bind anybody to anything. But if you put it in the BF&M, then you're going to deal with it on the issue level with the convention, with the seminaries, with the agencies. And, that's a lot of teeth to that.
If I can speak to the BF&M question for just a minute,
Mhm.
Every resolutions committee is different. So in the same way, every convention is different, every resolutions committee is different, and they have different priorities. And I'm only privy to the resolutions committee that I served on. But one of the things that we made very clear amongst ourselves is that we did not want to take any sort of stand that put the resolutions committee in the place of the Baptist faith and message, or offer some sort of authoritative papal interpretation of the Baptist faith and message. We had some resolutions that were submitted to us that addressed debatable issues within the BF&M. And those aren't secret. Most of them had to do with the question of women in ministry and where do we draw the boundaries. And we had 3 different perspectives across the spectrum represented in the resolutions that were submitted to us. And one of the things that we decided on is that we weren't going to address that issue, not because it's not an issue that all of us didn't have strong and I think biblical conservative convictions about, but we did not see it as the place of the resolutions committee to take the place of the Baptist faith and message. We have the Baptist faith and message, and if we need to revise it to clarify that issue or any other issue, then by all means, let's have a president appoint a committee and then let's do that. But we did not want to do that. So obviously we did not avoid controversy, but we were trying with that particular issue to avoid doing exactly the sort of thing that I think Dr. Traylor's speaking to, and take some sort of stand that might leave a lot of Southern Baptists saying, well, that's not what we believe about that issue. That's the Baptist faith and message is where we clarify those doctrinal issues. Not the resolutions committee. And if we do continue to have a resolutions committee, we weren't perfect. We could have done plenty of things better. But I hope that posture is the posture of future resolutions committees, and that they're not trying to do the work of a confession of faith. Well, we have a pretty good confession of faith.
Amen.
And if we can strengthen it, let's strengthen it. But it's not the place of the committee to theologize unless they are simply restating for the sake of emphasis what we already believe in the Baptist faith and message.
How do you guard against that? How do you protect that concept that you're explaining there and guard against someone having an agenda on the committee and then trying to push through some um, issue or some conversation piece with what you guys are saying, how we're as Baptists, we have some flexibility in some of these areas. That this is a lot of what people love about who we are. Um, and there's not a straight up black and white on every little secondary and third level kind of thing. But if someone gets on the committee that maybe wants to push one area that our Baptist Faith and Message would give some flexibility for, is there a way to guard against that, or are there any protections in place? What happens with the committee?
It's
One of the
really
great ways of guarding against that's not to have.
I threw a softball really well, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
I did not mean to do that, but yes.
So I mean, it really is up to the committee to set those parameters. And so again, all I can speak for is the committee that I served on.
Mhm.
We knew that there was one big thorny issue that we could not avoid addressing because there would be an uproar. And that's the question over race. And of course, there's people who like the way we addressed it, people who don't like the way we address it, and even some people who had no idea it was an issue until we addressed it. So that's the way that goes. But with we knew we couldn't avoid that. But with everything else, we tried very hard to say, where are Southern Baptists already at, and then how can we put a point on that? And for the most part, I think we succeeded. Not with every resolution. We were surprised by the abortion resolution, but you don't know what's going to happen until you bring it to the floor. But I know when we got together from the very beginning on a Zoom call, just like this, 3 or 4 months before the convention, what James Merritt made very clear and everybody very much agreed with is that if division happens, it happens, but the purpose is not to divide. Let's speak out of our consensus. Let's try to be a servant to the convention and just trust the Lord. And again, whether we succeeded or not very much depends upon the interpretation of whoever we might be talking to at the water cooler. But that was the honest posture. And I think that that's the best posture a committee can take if we continue to have these committees. And then I hope that we do. I'm not going to lose any sleep if we don't, as long as we still find some way that Southern Baptists can go on the record and say on those issues that we care about, that this is where we stand. Our conscience is held captive to the Word of God. We can do no other.
Yeah, with Nathan, on the the place where the committee was, man, you guys were in a vice. Everyone wanted you to speak to critical race theory. We wanted to hear something about that. We didn't hear those words, and we left not really knowing more. But James and you guys trying to thread the needle with that, and I think what you spoke to was great. But we walked out the door with really the same thing hanging over us about that issue. Are we for it or against it, or we just not going to say it? And I think we walked out with as much unsaid as we walked in. Not to disparage the resolution you brought, it was great. But the elephant in the room, or the herd of elephants in the room, was CRT. And that was the word people were looking for. But to have dealt with that was to throw out dynamite and Zippo ladders. I mean, that was going to be tough right there. So you guys, you played the hand you were dealt and did the best you knew to do. But I don't think when all was said and done that we really helped ourselves with that. And we could have spent 30 minutes praying and preaching and having an ice cream fellowship and been better off than we would have if we'd have spent all afternoon trying to deal with an issue that's not going to be binding. Thus, my motion is what I'm talking about. And there's got to be a way to speak to those issues. I talked to several people before I wrote out just the short phrases for my motion of saying, I know what I want to say, but there's got to be a way for the convention to express itself about certain things that we don't even know are going to come up. I dare say if we were meeting next week, somebody is going to bring a resolution about Afghanistan. And what we should have done or not done, leave no man behind. We need the opportunity to speak to those things that rise that we don't know anything about. But how to do that? Not an easy task. And I'm of the opinion we're better off not opening the door for divisiveness rather than putting ourselves together to go do what God's called us to be about. And we know what that is, and that's preaching the gospel, discipleship, theological education, and so forth.
One thing to keep in mind, and this is just an observation about the Southern Baptist Convention, whether we're talking about resolutions or this could apply to motions as well. In a local church, and I'm assuming 99% of our churches are congregational, at least on the biggest issues like calling pastors and voting for budgets and whatnot. If you have a vote that you lose, you vote against whatever the case is, the people that you voted against, those people, you worship with those people, you have cookouts with those people, they're in your Sunday school class or your small group, you're part of the missions team with them. And it's hard to resent the people who you're with week in and week out.
Sure.
And I feel like one of the dynamics we have in the Southern Baptist Convention right now is every time we take a vote, a majority of the convention is expressing its will on whatever it might be, whether, again, it's a resolution or it's an amendment to a motion or whatever the case might be. It's so much easier for us to go home and to mutter about each other and to be frustrated about each other because we didn't vote in the minority, or we didn't win the vote with these people that we worship with every week and that are part of our small group. It's just that guy I see once a year, or that lady who I've never met, or that person on social media. And I don't know how to overcome that. Again, I'm making an observation, but the further out you go with that democratic principle, while you have all the strength of building consensus when we're united and whatnot, it's a lot easier to resent the outcome of non-unanimous or nearly unanimous votes. A lot easier to question people's motives, a lot easier to, if people are so inclined, hopefully we don't have many people like this, to foster resentment and to foster rivalry over those things. And again, I don't know how to get around that in a democratic denomination, but I see that. I see it on social media. I see it in the email chains that get forwarded and things like that.
Yes, sir.
We're struggling right now with the division in a way that maybe certainly local churches are struggling with all these things as well. But again, it's a lot harder to resent the person you sit next to on the pew, or
observation well taken
with the person who's in your Sunday school class.
Yes, sir.
Well, and something you said too made me think, with the fact that so many people are sharing their stands and their opinions in blogs and social media, different things. Is there a difference even dealing with resolutions in today's world? Whereas, 50 years ago, there weren't all of these other avenues for people to make statements and stand on things. Is that impacting at all?
Well, no doubt. All we had to deal with 50 years ago was the Baptist paper. I mean, that.
Well, and it was an amazing piece of communication.
And what people understood even 15 years ago is if the three of us decided right now that we wanted to submit a resolution on the value of ministry to racing jockeys, and we're going to put that forward at the Southern Baptist Convention next year, we would understand even 15 years ago that the minute we submit that, it's not our resolution anymore. It goes to the committee, and then it's not the committee's resolution, it goes to the convention if they bring it out. But what people are inclined to do now is to submit the resolution and then immediately publish what they drafted on their blog and have all their friends link to it and retweet it and say they need to consider that Traylor Finn Rash resolution and that's just a completely different dynamic than we used to have in the Southern Baptist Convention, where you only knew about that if you literally knew personally the people who submitted the resolution. But now some of these resolutions proposals take on a life of their own before they ever get before the Southern Baptist Convention. And that's an entire another layer of controversy that just wasn't there before the age of instant access to the internet and everybody being able to share their opinions so easily.
Yeah, and that makes me think too. Okay, a couple things. One, the the resolution that came back up that you mentioned earlier on the topic of abortion that ended up getting passed, but was not put out by the committee. Um, are there dangers in resolutions going straight from the person who writes it to the messengers without the vetting of the committee? And what would those be? Is that part of the concern about it letting it go straight in? And then two, would it be okay for all the public to see all the resolutions that are submitted and let people mull over all of them, and then be able to review the summary versions that you pull together, the committees pull together to present to the messengers? Any advantages or disadvantages?
Just for clarity, do you mean see all the resolutions before they're
Proposed,
printed in the bulletin?
from anybody and everybody.
Yeah, to me, the only concern there is just how long we're there. I mean, it's hard enough to get it done in the time that we're there. And of
We
course,
put them make them available.
bring a resolution. I have no problem with the transparency of that proposal. Again, folks are going to know about many of those resolutions beforehand. Anyway, my concern, and maybe this is where I'm going to sound a little more like Dr. Traylor, is that we're already divided enough with the way we're doing it. If everybody sees every single resolution and they come in already thinking about it, to me that just opens up the opportunity for the entire day to get away from us with resolutions, and we're having a hard enough time. I don't know if y'all remember this. We actually had one more resolution that we just never brought forward.
Mhm.
It was there in the proposal. We didn't have time, and we could have cut a couple of them. And that's happened increasingly, not just in the last couple of years. That's happened a lot over the last 6 or 7 years, where the time just runs out. And that there's a sense in which the more information we have beforehand, which is a good thing,
Mhm.
an unintended consequence of that is the more we have time to get our powder ready so that we're there and we're aimed and we're ready to come right in with guns blazing. And I don't think anybody wants to see that happen. So I have
But
no problem with the transparency
Right, right,
of
right.
everything being published beforehand. I just worry about managing it on the floor, frankly.
and it comes to our governance. I mean, yeah, a one man at a microphone, one woman at a microphone, got as much power as anybody in the room, and if you can sway the room. But we have a process that's in place right now where a resolutions committee, and Jennifer, you spoke about, the maybe you have somebody on that committee that has got an agenda or whatever. Well, it all comes back to the election of the president of the convention and the power. I mean, the president doesn't have much power,
Mhm.
but he does have the power of appointment in a couple of places, and that's all he's got. And he doesn't get paid. And but he says these folks. He asks them, and if he can talk Dr. Finn into doing it, then he's going to be on that committee and help us with the process of that. So to set that committee, the power is in the election of the president. Because he's the one that should be vetting who's going to be on that committee. And if he has an agenda, he'll set the agenda through his appointment on that committee. I'm old enough in this trio to remember the conservative resurgence, and I was there, as Adrian calls us, the foot soldiers, and we were just young kids, but we were there to elect the president because he would appoint the committee that put the committees together that finally changed the whole tenor and standing of the Southern Baptist Convention. It's the same way of guarding this, but the best way, we've got a process when it comes to the resolutions committee. Get the right people on it. You got to go through it. I mean, if you let people stand up and read your resolutions all over that hall with 15 or 20,000 people, there's no way to do that. I mean, it just, I'm going to Starbucks if you're going to start that. I just, it'd be crazy. It would just be chaos all the way around. So we need some order, and the
Right.
resolutions committee meets ahead and does its work, and then brings out these proposals, and then we get to debate them and amend them and cut them up and change or whatever, and then finally say yes or no to those results.
Mhm. And also, I think from years of covering these different committees, I believe I understand too, correct me if I'm wrong, some of what you do too in the committee structure is to take everybody's resolutions that came in on a certain topic and try to do the best we can to get those all together into one, but also being very careful to make sure we don't get out of bounds of what the majority of the people in the Southern Baptist Convention would feel comfortable with. All of that you said earlier, but all of that happens in that committee structure. And then there's that chance too of fact checking and things like that that can't be done on the spot, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you may not know this, but one of the things that happens whenever the committee comes together is there's always a representative from the executive committee
Okay.
who's with you the whole time. And if you request it, there is a representative from the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission.
Oh,
And those two individuals serve to help with the fact checking, if you will.
okay.
And also just to be able to ask about, if we say this, are there unintended negative consequences that we're not seeing? Like, let me give you an example that I don't think would get me in trouble with James Merritt. One of
We'll
our
talk to him next.
one of our resolutions was on the Uyghur genocide
Okay.
and whether we wanted to pull that forward. We were 100% confident that Southern Baptists en masse would adopt that resolution, and they did. But one of the things that we needed to fact check beforehand is we needed to make sure that the International Mission Board was going to be comfortable with that language, because we're not sure that there might not be some negative mission ramifications. And then we needed to make sure that we weren't going to get ourselves in trouble from a religious liberty perspective. Well, the ethics and religious liberty person who was in the room ran point on that. We didn't have to worry about it. He went and talked to Paul Chitwood, and Paul Chitwood told him someone else to talk to, and came back. And what we had written, they asked one of the sentences to be changed. Didn't change anything from what we were trying to communicate, but it helped us avoid a potential speed bump whenever it comes to our mission work. So there are a couple of folks who are there in the room to help us with those sorts of things. And we were very thankful to have those folks with us. I'm not sure that we were successful, but I'm confident it would have been a disaster had we not had a couple of folks who weren't on the committee, but were there just to serve us and help us however they could, and make sure that that we were doing right by folks as best we could.
One thing too that I've observed is going into the annual meeting, the chairman of the resolutions committee rarely, if ever, maybe just in my time doesn't report out that we have received X number of proposed resolutions with 13 topics and a bunch of different little ones. And we've now put them together into these 6 or whatever. What is it about trying to keep that piece of information contained, just the number and the general topics?
I don't think anybody's trying to keep it contained. I think our tradition has been that's just reported through the through the daily reports that we get whenever we come in. I think what your question might lead us to all to conclude or to think about is maybe the way we've been doing things isn't as successful and transparent as we thought. Again, I don't think there's any attempt to try and hide it or not give that information. I just think since time immemorial, people have come in on Tuesday morning, and if necessary Wednesday morning, and they pull that sheet up, and that's where they look to find it. And now it's also available on the app, but it's still the same principle, and it's released at the same time. So maybe there is a way to do it that's better. I just think we're doing what we've always done, and now we have a slightly cooler technological way to do it that connects with the young folks, but it's still the same idea. You find out about it first thing in the morning.
Yeah, that was just, I've just always been curious, because that's a question I tend to ask ahead of time, and I'm always referred to Tuesday. Wait till Tuesday, and you'll know what we have. So I just think that's interesting that I know the committee knows how many resolutions came in. So I was just curious if there was a reason to hold that tight to it.
There was a record number of resolutions this year.
Yeah,
that made things very exciting.
I can imagine. Okay, so we have reasons why we don't want to present all the content that's proposed and put it out there and let people read it all because of time and just what it would end up doing for everyone trying to get to the microphone and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking because everybody would be there. Is there any advantage of shifting the conversations maybe, and I'm brainstorming now, but a place to have these conversations, shift them to some other format so they're not in forms of resolutions that have to be um, voted up or down by messengers, but maybe just is there a way to help Southern Baptists just have a place to have these conversations so they can figure it out, process, work through it, learn how to pick apart all the pieces and get to the point where they're trying to find that answer, such as what you're talking about, Dr. Traylor. How did we walked in wanting an answer? We're not sure we got that. Is there a place to do that?
Well, Jennifer, have you ever walked the halls outside of the Southern Baptist Convention hall, meeting room? And uh, there's a lot of conversation going on about a lot of
That's
those things.
true. That is true. Good point. Excellent point.
But I understand your question. I don't know. Nathan might think through that, or maybe another way for us to do it. But I don't think there's any way
Mhm.
except that you've got to raise a ballot. If we're
Yeah.
going to do something, you've got to get in that room.
Mhm.
If we're going to have a consensus
Mhm.
that this is what we're saying on a particular topic, and you just raise your ballot or you don't. And uh, there may be a better way of educating a little more ahead of time or whatever, but I don't know of it if there would be another way, because that's our governance. It's, as I often say, it's our greatest strength and greatest weakness when we come together in that regard.
That's right. And I think it doesn't only apply to resolutions, it applies to motions. We had
Sure.
some
Mhm.
hotly debated motions this year. We had proposals that were brought forward that were hotly debated. We didn't have this year, but in past years, with things like the Great Commission Resurgence or the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 Committee or the Calvinism Task Force, we've had these groups that have brought forth kind of white paper type proposals that we vote on. All of those, it's the same dynamic, and sometimes it's released much more in advance so people can think about it, but
Mhm.
it's still the same thing that happens. It's you
Mhm.
gotta you gotta raise the ballot, you
Yeah.
gotta take the vote.
Right. Right. All right. So the Southern Baptist Convention Executive Committee will be meeting in very soon to talk about your motion, whether or not to consider removing the resolutions committee from life in Southern Baptist life. So to finish up, each of you give a quick message to say what you would suggest to the executive committee as they think about this.
Well, since I made the motion, I'll speak first, and Nathan can uh, speak. And I just want them to look and look for the best way for us to keep our eye on the ball of who we are and what we're to be doing in missions and evangelism and theological education. That's where I want us to go. Get us off these side roads. If there's a better way to do this, hey, I'm all about it. I just think this will help us unify us in our energy and getting our energy in the right place for the convention and come out of it with a full head of steam, going back home to do what we're really called to do. And there are other ways of speaking to some of these issues. Men smarter than I am can figure that out and get it done, but in a way that we just don't come out wrangling with each other again and again and again over some issues that I just don't think help us. So I hope in September that the EC will look at that. I don't know what their procedure will be of how that will step forward. As I said, I've been coming to this meeting for a long, long time, never made a motion in my life. And so we'll see what they do with it and find out. And if they don't deal with it, no problem with me. We'll just keep giving our money to cooperative program, winning people across Olive Road to Jesus, and keep on going. That's all I know to do. I've been a Southern Baptist a long time, and I'm in it and for it. And I just believe we do a lot of great things, and that's why I think we should do away with the resolutions committee, is so we continue to do the great things that we do the very best.
So I think if I had the opportunity to talk to the executive committee, what I would say to them is Dr. Traylor's concerns are not unique to him. There are people across the Southern Baptist Convention who have concerns about the resolution committee. And by the way, not from any one camp or tribe or region in the Southern Baptist Convention. There's folks across the map who are asking the same question. So if I were you, executive committee, I would be asking myself, if we keep a resolutions committee, which would be my personal preference, Nathan, if we keep the resolution committee, how can we give a little bit more guidance to the resolution committee so that in as much as possible, they can avoid and mitigate some of those concerns that Dr. Traylor and others would raise? Or if you want to affirm the Traylor motion and eliminate a resolutions committee, what sort of mechanism could be created so that there's still the opportunity for Southern Baptists to address cultural issues that are directly related to our public witness that we need to speak on, but maybe there's a better way to do it than we're doing it now. And think creatively, executive committee, and come up with something better than the resolutions committee. At the end of the day, what I care about is that Southern Baptists are able to speak truth to our culture as part of our corporate witness. And whatever way best serves that, I'm going to get behind it, and we're just going to keep trying to be faithful.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. We will watch and see what happens with the executive committee. Thank you for just having this conversation. It was very helpful to me, and I know it was helpful for those who are listening.
Thank you.